What if? It's a great question that is a starting point for something to follow. If you say what if to someone, you are opening up a conversation that can go some places. It's as if you inflated a helium balloon and just kind of see where it goes when you let it go, right? What if is a question of imagination. It can be a question of dreaming. In the Bible, in the Old Testament, we have prophets, and I think the prophets were what-if kind of people, even if they don't actually use the words what if. Generally, the prophets are doing a couple of things. They are calling people to live the way that God has invited them to when they're not. And they could have said, hey, everybody, what if we just tried doing what God has asked us to do and see how that goes? Sometimes the prophets speak words of comfort. And in that case, it could be as if they were saying, hey, what if God is actually with us all the time, even when we can't see it? And then they're inviting people to imagine what that looks like. In this way, I think the prophets were dreamers. If you look at the way Scripture is printed, like if you read Genesis and Exodus and the Gospels, most of it is written like prose, right? It's paragraphs that tell a story. The Psalms, on the other hand, are written like poetry. Well, if you read the prophets, it's both. There's narrative parts of the story, and then whenever they're speaking the word of the Lord, that often is in the form of a poem. And when the Lord is speaking back to them, in the form of a poem. So these prophets were not future teller, crystal ball kind of people. They were poets whose job was to speak God's big dream for life into the world. And that dream is pretty consistent all the way through Scripture. In the second chapter of Isaiah, God says that all the peoples on the earth will come to God's mountain, and their swords will be beaten into plowshares, and there will be no more war. That's a big dream. In Isaiah 25, it says that on this mountain the Lord of hosts will make for all peoples a feast of rich foods and well-aged wines. And it says there will be no more death and no more pain and no more crying. That dream is echoed again in Revelation 21, where we hear about a new heaven and a new earth and the new city of Jerusalem. And again, no more crying, no more pain, no more tears. Jesus comes along and says, hey, love God and love your neighbor as yourself, right? And he comes to show us what that dream looks like in action. So those prophets, and they thought Jesus was a prophet, right? Their job was to speak God's dream in the world. And the beginning words of the dream are, what if? Now, what we learn in the passage today from Jeremiah is that being God's dreamer in the world is not an easy path. If you go back and read it, what you'll see is that almost immediately Jeremiah says, Lord, on your account, I am suffering insult. Like, it is a hard thing to speak the dream, because immediately people say, well, that's ridiculous. And then they insult you for being the dreamer. But you get a sense that Jeremiah is maybe thinking about giving up. Like, I don't want to be the dreamer anymore. And he says, but I ate your word, which means have taken in the dream, and it gave me joy and delight. So Jeremiah can't ignore the dream because it has given him joy and delight. But then speaking the dream, he comes around and says, I'm alone, and my pain will not go away. So being the dreamer, right, while it gives him joy and delight to experience God's dream, speaking it has left him alone in pain and ridiculed. It is hard to be God's dreamer. Now, when we think about what if, little kids are fantastic at what if. I have just finished a book of devotions for the early years of mothers by my pastor friend, Pastor Kim Knoll-Zeller, and her co-author, Aaron Stribis. And in one of the later devotions, Pastor Kim reflects on a day before school when her daughter looked at her little brother and said, what if the whole school was donuts? And then they had a whole conversation about what it would be like if the whole school was donuts. Then her brother said, well, what if the whole school was desks? And then that led into a whole conversation about what happens if the school was desks. Now that's silly. But it's the same silliness where a kid can have a tea party and imagine that the teddy bear is the Queen of England, or dress up like a superhero and imagine they can fly, right? Kids have great big what-if imaginations. If you ask a little kid what they want to do when they grow up, do any of them say, I want to sit in a cube and type on a keyboard all day? No, right? Because they got what if kind of dreams. But the thing about their dreams is it's not just silly stuff. Kids also have very profound what if questions. They don't always start with what if, though. They just have what if energy. So in places where there's racial division, a little boy might look at his parents and go, why can't I go play with my friend whose skin color is a different color? That's a what if question, right? There's some imagination there and some dreaming there about what could be. A little girl might look and say, why don't I get to do what the boys are doing? Also, that's a what if question that's dreaming bigger than what is right now. You all have experienced me as a pastor who is militant about communing everybody that comes in the building. I did not always think that way. I was part of a changing landscape in the church where my mom didn't have communion until she got confirmed in 8th grade. I got communion when I took a class in 4th grade. My older son started taking communion when he was 8 because he took the class. And then my younger son looked at me and said, why don't I get to take communion? And I said, because you don't understand. Because we have always had some kind of ridiculous measure about understanding for who gets to participate at the table. He looked at me that Christmas, and this is a what if question, but he didn't say what if. He said, Christmas Eve, he leans over, his communion's unfolding, and he whispers, like the little kids whisper, Dad, I think all kids should get bread at Christmas. He might as well have stood up and said to the church, hey, what if Jesus showing up as a baby was for all of us, and that when we come around this meal, we're supposed to meet all of us at the table with him and participate? Did I have an answer for that? My answer was, go on right up there and take communion, because clearly this is not about me understanding what you understand and all the rest of it, right? That's a what if kind of question. So as I think about, right, the what if energy of the prophets, but the loneliness of being the prophet, the way they pop the balloon every time you float that idea up there, and I think about the what if energy that kids carry, I have to ask the question, when do we stop dreaming? Actually, a better question maybe is, why do we stop dreaming? And I don't think it's because the things we dream fail, because failure happens, right? I think it's because when we dream, someone around us, the system around us, sooner or later says, you know what? Why do you got to be over there doing that? Can't you just get along with the rest of us, go along with the way things are? And I have seen this happen multiple times, and you all have too as well. And it's not always God's big dream. One of my corporate projects I was on, someone in the organization had looked at what we called their supply chain. So somebody buys all the raw materials, it goes in the factory, gets made into something, they package all that up, put it on a truck, and send it out to their customers. And each of those things was what we would call a silo, right? They worked just within their little bounds, and they didn't cooperate across. And somebody had a little corporate dream that said, you know what? I bet if we worked better across, we could actually save a ton of money and make profits go up and all whatever you're trying to figure out all there. But we would have to work together. And so somebody said, sure, why don't you give it a try? And they probably winked at each other and said, we'll see if this works. So they brought in my company and we interviewed all the executives. And they all had the same answers. They knew exactly where the problems were. And they knew how to work across there. They knew what the answer was. So we were super excited. We got them all in a room to finally figure out, all right, we got it all laid out. We understand the dream. Now let's make it happen. I watched the dream die that day. I watched the balloon get popped and all the air come out of it. Because what we didn't know is that in their little silos, their Christmas bonuses were tied to their metrics. And if I have to cooperate with you so you can do better, I might do worse. That means my bonus goes down, and I'm not doing that. And whoever had that dream, I bet that day, walked out of the office and said, well, I learned my lesson. There's no point fighting against the system in this place. Happens in the church. When I was a seminary intern, we had a congregation 5 miles away from us, and south of them was a huge new development that didn't have any churches. And they had a handful of families that lived there, and they had a dream. They said, you know what? All of those people that live there don't have a place to get connected to God. What if we took our few people and gathered all of our other congregations and shared our resources and started something new? And so they gathered all of our congregations together, and we sat down in this meeting, and they went and said, let's go around the room and say, why did you come today? And lots of curiosity, but then it got to the guy sitting a couple of people away from me, and he said, I'm here because they did it wrong. Now, they was my internship congregation, because a year before that, we had started a campus in an elementary school about 20 miles away, because it was in a zip code with like 200,000 people that weren't connected to church. And so we said, well, that's a good place to start. Well, there was a congregation 5 miles away from that, and the pastor sent us a cease and desist letter because he thought we were coming to steal his people rather than trying to connect to new people. And so he showed up at their dream meeting and just said, I'm just here because they did it wrong. Now, I was curious. I asked my supervisor, why didn't you have all of the rest of the churches join in this effort of launching this campus in elementary school? And his answer was, because they would have killed it, killed the dream. Well, I didn't believe him until I was in the dream meeting with this other congregation, and after a bunch of talking about what they were dreaming about, they said, let's go around the room and see how you all think you can help make this happen. And it got to the guy who said, I'm here because they did it wrong, and what do you think he wanted to offer to help? Absolutely nothing. Got to the next person. They said, what about you? And they said, well, we can't give you any money or people. We'll pray for you, which prayer's not nothing. But when you're gathering a group of people to try to mobilize some resources and some energy, right, you could just see the air come out of the balloon. You could see the whole thing die right there. And if we're going to kill the dreams, we should also pay attention to what happens to the dreamers. Jeremiah is telling us, hey, it's hard. I'm out here all by myself. I don't even know if I want to keep doing this. Martin Luther was a dreamer. He read the Bible and said, hey, what if we're saved by grace, not by works? And what did they tell him? No, that's not the way this is going to go. He was labeled a fugitive. His prince had to hide him in a castle so he didn't get executed. Martin Luther King Jr. literally said, I have a dream. Was it his dream, or was he taking what he digested as a pastor about God's dream and speaking it into the world? God's dream, right? And then what happened to him? Assassinated. We do not, as a world, like the dreamers to be around, right? They disrupt things. And we all shut down the dreams. I've done it twice in the last 6 weeks. We had a town hall meeting a while back after each service, and at one of them somebody said, hey, what if? Great question, right? I always love what comes after what if. What if we had one service during the summertime next year so that all of us could be connected across the two services and build relationships and everything else? So what did I say to that? No! Do you know why? I said, because I've seen what happens. We have proof. During the pandemic, we had one service early. And I'm not judging y'all, just how many of you got up early and came? A couple, but not a lot. You come at 10:30 because you don't want to get up in the morning. So what you would say is, yes, let's have one service in the summer at 10:30. And the people at 8 go, well, then the day's half gone, and I can't come to church that late, right? Now, a better answer would have been, what if? Great question. Your hope is that we can connect people and get to know each other better. How can we best do that? And maybe let's try one service and get everybody to commit to getting up a little early and getting up a little later and coming together as one, right? But no, I just tried to deflate that balloon right away because I think I know all these things because I've been doing this a while. The other one, somebody said to me, Pastor, what if, instead of doing VBS at night like we have a couple of times recently, we did it again during the day? Because when my son was younger and I was a working parent, I was able to take him to a place where I knew he would have fun, where he would learn about God, and it might be a way for us to connect with kids in the neighborhood and get more people connected to God come to the church. Great what if question. What did I say? No! Why? Because when all I heard was the second part. Maybe people will come to the church if we get more kids to VBS during the day. When I was an intern, we had 500 kids at VBS, most of whom weren't part of the church. How many of them joined the church after VBS? 0. I've never seen it happen, right? And so when we do Vacation Bible School, we do it for leadership development for our middle and high school kids so they can lead the little kids, and there's a whole system, right? But what I missed when she said that was when I was a working parent and my kid was little, there was a place that he could go. What if our goal for VBS isn't to somehow grow the church, but to serve the community? Does that change that question? It absolutely does, but it means we have to take those what ifs and go, yeah, what if? Now, here's the thing with Jeremiah. Jeremiah is speaking God's dream. It's left him alone and isolated. And then the text switches voices and says, hear the word of the Lord. And God says to Jeremiah, more or less, keep speaking the dream. Because if you keep speaking the dream, here's what's going to happen. Don't go toward those that aren't dreaming. They will come to you. God knows, because it's God, that God's dream is going to outlast all of the doubters and the naysayers and the ones that want to pop the balloon and say no to all the what ifs. This is what happens with Jesus, right? He comes into the world, he says, hey, what if we all tried loving each other for once? And the world said, no, and put him on the cross. Deflated the whole thing. Was that the end? No, because God's dream is bigger than our ability to try to thwart the dream, and it's going to live and it's going to thrive. So God tells Jeremiah, don't go toward them. They will come to you if you keep speaking the dream, because the dream is bigger than the rest of us. And then God finishes by saying, and I'll be there with you. I'll deliver you. I'll save you, right? I will be with you that whole way. This text, I think, invites us to dream big. And there's plenty of dreaming we can do. We can dream about a world where you can talk to your friends and neighbors without worrying about if you're going to get into some hyperbolic political fight. We could dream about a world where our kids don't have to learn how to get lockdown drills in case somebody comes to school with a gun. We could dream about a world where kids have enough to eat everywhere. We could dream about a world, all kinds of big dreams, right? And as soon as I start saying that out loud, it's pretty easy to go, well, that's not going to happen, right? We're stuck. But God invites us to dream big dreams and trust that if we do the dreaming, eventually God's going to drag everybody toward the dream. I found myself looking up the lyrics this week of John Lennon's Imagine, and it's got all kinds of things he's asking us to imagine. Imagine there's no heaven. I don't know about that. Imagine there's no hell. I could be on board with that. Imagine there's no religion. If we're getting rid of the toxic part of it, sure. Like, I'm going through all the imagine, but then I got to the refrain. And you may say that but I'm not the only one. I hope someday you will join us, and the world will be as one. Later it says live as one. He literally is singing what Jeremiah is told to do. Don't walk away from the dream. Keep dreaming. And when everybody gets to that dream, we'll be one. This is God's dream, not ours. And God will drag everybody to that dream eventually. Some of us probably kicking and screaming. But when we get to that great unity of grace, it will be the joy and delight that Jeremiah experiences. And we can get that along the way as we dream that dream as well. Amen.